Today's first program on Jack Chambers' talk. I need to let you have Jack's information on his introduction. I'm sure that many of you come to this conference, especially from today, to listen to his lecture. If you do the social linguistics, I'm sure that all of you have access to his book by, say, dialectology from Cambridge University Press with Peter Jervil, social linguistic theory, which is really intriguing books. And also this handbook of language variation and change. And he has written a number of articles in social linguistics and language variation and change. And as an organizer or as a chair for this conference, I really like his papers and books on, especially on the social linguistic theory and the one on dialect acquisition. And I read his books and articles when I was a graduate student in Essex. I came across with some Japanese scholars' names. It's actually the Takeshi Shibata work on language formation period in his dialect acquisition studies, which made me so excited. Japanese social linguists make some contribution, a great contribution to this type of study. And also, if you browse and look over social linguistic theory books by Jack, we can see a study made in Tsuruoka on standardization Japanese on the real-time basis. It's a really great pleasure to welcome Jack Chambers, and he's going to talk about sorry, turn it over. The Professor Shibata's Haha and other social linguistic insights. So, Jack.
Thanks, Yoshi. This microphone can be turned up if it needs to be, but I think it's probably all right. Seems all right. Yeah. So that's very kind and very generous, and it's just a great privilege and pleasure for me to be here at this conference, the NWAV AP, the second of the NWAV AP conferences that we all hope everybody in the world, every linguist in the world hopes it will become an annual event, and it looks very promising. We have a very good-looking delegation from from many of the regions, and that's a good start, a wonderful start. So it was particularly a pleasure for me when I received the invitation from Yopish to come here today, because one of the themes of the conference is Japanese sociolinguistics, and as it happens, I mean, quite by accident or sort of as a matter of curiosity, I've been involved for many years with Japanese sociolinguistics in one way or another, mainly through colleagues, some of whom are here today, but also because of an accident that I'll talk about later in the talk, about halfway through the talk. I'll show you how, I'll let you know how this connection to Professor Shibata, Takeshi Shibata came about. And it was interesting in a way, and it started a long, kind of prolonged engagement with his works, and I'm going to talk about various kinds of relations that have come up as a result. So I'm going to start by talking about a sociolinguistic notion that is fairly sophisticated, and I'll show you how Takeshi Shibata melds into that. The notion of age grading is a particular kind of change that requires the apparatus of the apparent time hypothesis in order to make any sense at all. And the apparent time hypothesis, as I'll mention in a few minutes, came forcibly into sociolinguistics at the very beginning of the international movement towards sociolinguistics in the 1960s, the result of Professor William Leboff's work, but I'm going to show you this age grading now, which is a kind of spin-off. It's a kind of change that only makes sense if you have the apparent time hypothesis in operation. And it's the apparent time hypothesis, as everybody in here should know, must know, makes the assumption that people speak essentially the same way from age 18 onwards, something like that. So the way you speak between the ages of 8 and 18 is pretty much the way you'll speak the rest of your life, and everybody knows that's not literally true, that there are small changes that we all make, and we're all quite conscious of that. But the hypothesis holds with such force that in fact it's been used, it's one of the key concepts of modern linguistics, not just modern sociolinguistics, but it has revolutionized historical linguistics as well as sociolinguistics and anthropological linguistics and so on. So it's been shown time and again that if you compare the way people who are 25 years old speak in the same community with people who are 45, the differences in the way they speak are roughly changes that have taken place in that interval, in that period of time. So that's the apparent time hypothesis. And age grading comes along then, and it asks the question, what happens if people change systematically at some point in their lives from form A to form B in generation after generation after generation? That is a violation, in a sense, of the apparent time hypothesis, because instead of the change progressing, the change, in fact, is something that marks a stage of life. So we get one form used by children and a different form used by adults, and the change takes place generation after generation. We all know that. The English speakers among us know that words like pee-pee and poo-poo get replaced by adult words at some point. And that's this kind of change. That's an age-graded change. And so one of the questions that you can put on your introductory sociolinguistics test is, what is the sociolinguistic significance of pee-pee and poo-poo? All right. So the ha-ha of my title comes from a paper by Takashi Shibata called Learning to Say Ha-ha, and it was, he published it in 1959, and it's in this wonderful translation that I'm going to talk about in great detail, the translation, later on today. But children use honorifics that are inappropriate when they're adults, and Shibata noticed this. It's the kind of fact that the good sociolinguists notice, and that most of the population simply takes for granted because it happens so commonly. But he noticed that the children can say "okasanga," "oshamashita," and that's all right for kids. But there are, and he quotes this sort of Ministry of Education directive that says polite reference forms and honorifics are not to be used when referring to a family or close relations, when talking to someone who is not a close relation. And generally, polite adverse forms and honorifics are not usually used for someone in the in-group. And I mean, the Japanese people in the audience don't need to be told that, but the rest of us probably do. There's a change that takes place that's considered immodest. And if you use the polite form referring to, say, your mother, which is the case that I'm going to use here. So adults do not say "oshamashita," but children do say it. And at some point, young people have to learn to say "hahaga," "moshimashita," and so what Takashi Shibata noticed at a time that was actually before people were noticing this kind of social phenomenon in general, there comes a point in the life of children when they have to make the adjustment, make the change. And so he set about studying how that works. And he wanted to find out particularly when the change takes place, because of course it's beneath consciousness, it's just something that happens, and It's again analogous to that case. If you ask a 25-year-old Canadian when he stopped saying pee-pee, he wouldn't have any idea. Right? It's just one of those things that happen. And it's the same with the use of the ha-ha. When ha-ha replaced the formal term to when does the change take place. And so Takashi Shibata set out to discover that. And what he did was he distributed a written questionnaire to school children. And it had questions on it like these, so he contextualized the setting, which is something that good sociolinguists have to do, of course. Who usually packs your lunch for you on track and field day? Please write down the reply. And of course, the school children being obedient, 1959, fully. You've gone to your friend Kazuko Yamada's house. Her mother asks you, who usually gives you pocket money to buy pencils and erasers for school? How would you reply? Questions like that. And so various questions that were designed, intended to get my mother as the answer. Right? And with one of the characteristics of Takashi Shibata's work and of the work that has followed from his work here at the National Institute and other parts, the sample is large, right? So he had almost 5,500 schoolgirls from 3 different classes, and you can see that he asked what in those days was an uptown and a downtown division, and he found out that elementary school kids almost never say ha-ha, and that junior high kids, about half of them say ha-ha, and by the time they get to senior high, almost all of them say ha-ha. So you can see this is an apparent time study, an apparent time study implicitly, and he has discovered the sort of age, the crucial age area. And I just want to introduce this because it introduces another dimension to the sociolinguistic acumen of Takashi Shibata. Another of the scholars here at the National Institute, this all happened at this very place that we're standing in today, except it was physically a different place. Like it was more like a factory than this place is. Anyway, it was a great place. Anyway, Taka Suzuki asked 100 students from each of those groups, who usually packs your lunch for you in track and field day, right? That's question A from the written questionnaire. But this, he asked, and the results, you'll notice if you compare the 2 tables, the results are much less. For Taka Suzuki in the groups, and the question then arises, why should that happen? And the answer is that when you confront kids directly, face to face, some of them will say, well, I feel a bit uneasy, I feel a bit strange using ha, and they will also admit when you ask them that they know it's correct, but it just feels strange because they're at this cusp, right at the moment of the transition. And Suzuki pointed out many avoided the issue by using a circumlocution as well. Okay, so you get this nice little sociolinguistic study that has wonderful implications in all kinds of directions. And here, other scholars here at the National Institute then applied the questionnaire in various parts of the country. And you can see here's a graph that goes from elementary 5th year all the way to senior high 3rd year. And if you look very carefully, you'll see that in the big city, in Tokyo uptown, for instance,